In this portion of the film, intervention strategies for working with older victims of domestic violence are discussed. An abuse survivor volunteered to discuss her experiences. She has provided her informed consent for her statements to be used in this film. However, her identity has been concealed to protect her safety and privacy and that of her family. Her statements are her own and are not endorsed by or reflect any official policy, claim, or position by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or any of its agencies. Professionals from community agencies provide their recommendations for working with older victims. Opinions expressed by the panel members are their own. Professionals watching this film must carefully evaluate the potential risks and benefits of various intervention strategies in each individual situation that they encounter. The use of Lifeline pendants as a safety strategy is discussed by the panel. While medical alert devices such as Lifeline can be helpful, a pendant can become a potential weapon that an abuser can use to inflict strangulation. It is therefore strongly recommended that a wristband form of medical alert device be used instead of a pendant where there is potential for violence in the home.
Welcome. My name is Erin. I run a healthcare-based domestic and sexual violence program, and I'm your moderator for today. Our hopes for today's panel are to discuss the ways in which our organizations can better address domestic and sexual violence in the lives of survivors in later life. I'd like to welcome Sabal Inteta, who's been a protective services supervisor at Ethos. Sabal's been with Ethos in the greater Boston area for approximately the last 15 years. And Stacy Lance, who is currently with the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. Stacy's been in the field for close to a decade, the last 3 of them with the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. And Mary Giannakis, who is the director of a community-based domestic and sexual violence program, Voices Against Violence, and you've been doing this work for 15 years. And Katie Galinas, who runs the Older Battered Women's Program, and you have been the director of the Older Battered Women's Program for, again, about a decade and a half. Mm-hmm. And then we are all here very excited to support who's a survivor of abuse. And we're going to start today by asking to share those pieces of your story that you're comfortable sharing.
Where should I start?
Wherever you would like.
Okay. I am newly divorced after a 46-year marriage, and the marriage probably was abusive all the way through. After all that time, I became ill, and I couldn't do very much around the house, and I couldn't do anything financially because of complications of lupus and being bipolar. So my husband started to tell me what to do. He started to tell me what not to do and kind of when to do it. And I had been like a frog in water. You know, it was hot and I was in the pot, and that old story of how the heat comes up and the frog stays in the water until it's boiling, and the frog doesn't even really realize it because it's so gradual, and then the frog dies. And I think I was near the point of emotional death when I had big back surgery, and I was out of the house for a total of 2.5 months for that. And then because I had experience with never having help after surgery or any major illness, I knew that I couldn't go home and expect to recover. So I took all of my IRA and I paid for assisted living for 7 months so that I would have time to heal, and I wouldn't put stress on the marriage, and I wouldn't put stress on me, that I could really heal. And then during that time being separated, I began slowly, I was in rehab for 6 weeks, and I began to slowly realize that I felt more comfortable around people. And I started to feel kind of like I knew myself. And that had never happened before, and I never had space before for that to kind of dawn on me. And as it was dawning on me, I realized I was never going to go back home. And that was through, talking to people I trusted, through tears, through prayer, talking some more, talking to a priest. And gradually I began to realize that my marriage vow kind of didn't apply to me anymore. That I was really no longer married and probably had never really been married, which is coming to me more and more the longer I'm divorced. So during that time, and before that, my psychologist and my psychiatrist both referred me and filed a complaint with Protective Services in my area. And because it was such a quiet kind of abuse, I mean, I was verbally abused all the time, demeaned and undercut and controlled, and the victim of sarcasm, oh, can't you take a joke? That kind of stuff. No one in the family noticed, really. No one who didn't know me as the new self. I was healed in my body. I began to get healed in my spirit. That complaint didn't go anywhere, kind of because there were no observers in the family. Everyone took it for granted. The only direct observer was my friend who worked in Protective Services in another agency, and realized what was wrong. And what was wrong was I was just starting to feel myself a self. Realized that I had been a victim of financial abuse. There was $51,000 of unpaid taxes that I now have to deal with. He gambled, he drank, he had an affair, and through all these things, I just kept staying married. We had wonderful kids, all sons. So that was a gift from the marriage. And I don't know, I just, in this environment of the assisted living, I just got relaxed. And during that time, I got a phone call from someone who was very nice on the phone. And she talked to me for a little while, and then she said, how about I come to your apartment or your room at the assisted living and just kind of meet you. And so I said yes. She was nice, and any friend is a good friend. And I was really open to meeting new people, and my life opened up, and I really I took deep breaths. I let the sun shine in my room. I was feeling friendly. So this friendly woman came over, and we talked for a long time. And slowly she asked me about my life and my marriage and why I left for this safety in a place. That was the thing. This place was safe. And I experienced safety really for the first time. So Katie, I learned, finally said she had a support group. And she thought that I might be appropriate for the support group. And I joined that support group. And through the support of that group, through the support of the women there, especially through the support of Katie, I began to realize that even though I wasn't going back home, being separated wasn't safe enough for me. And it didn't provide me all the outlets that I really needed to grow in every dimension of my life. My faith community, and that's where I knew the woman I had referred to before, was very supportive, and I felt free spiritually. But I didn't feel free in any other aspect of my life. And for example, he has a gym membership, and I, who can't exercise except to the water, didn't have a membership, and he told me that I couldn't, that I didn't need it. And he never used the gym. So I used to say to him, we have two standards of living in the same marriage. And my standard of living is, subsistence. And yours is grand. He went to operas in New York City all the time, Chicago, San Francisco, places I had never been. And he just said, well, you know, this is me. I work, and you're on disability. So, you know, I'm healthy, and you're just not well enough to travel. Things like that, that made me marginalized. So, in Katie's group, and with support of my faith community, and especially one of my sisters, who herself is divorced, I just began to realize that I could have a life, that I even could have a relationship with a man, that, you know, that I could be a human being again. And then the divorce proceedings, Katie went with me to the lawyer the first time. At that point, I wasn't ready to really say divorce. So Katie and the lawyer, and Katie got me a pro bono lawyer so that I could afford to get a divorce. A lot of agencies were behind me. I had a lot of blessings along the way. I started to really think more about divorce, and could I be divorced, and what it would be like to have that label divorced compared to separated or married. And I slowly began to realize that I just had to get divorced. So Katie came with me to the lawyer again. She came with me to court for the mediation. And when it came time for the divorce hearing, Katie offered to come, to drive me, to wait, and all these things. And I thought, gee, I'm fit. You know, I'm ready for the world now. So I said to her, well, thank you, but I don't want to have him overwhelmed by all my support. So still thinking about him, and I still have trouble not thinking about his needs, his safety, his, I don't know. Oh my God. Anyway, so I did become divorced, and that day I wished I had said to Katie, would you be there? I want to go out to lunch.
Yeah.
You know, I really needed to talk it over with somebody. And having refused the offer, I realized I still wasn't ready for the real world. You know, I thought I was all set, but I still need support. And that, for me, that's why I stayed in the marriage. I figured that I should do things on my own. And now I realize that I don't have to, and that my life is fuller when I have someone like Katie and a support group, and other people too. Other agencies have been there for me, and now my life has a fuller dimension, and I feel like safe and happy, and people who love me. The circle has expanded, and I feel really blessed.
You're an amazing woman. You've come so far since I've known you,
thank you.
really.
Yeah. Well, you've been there all along.
That's why we all do what we do.
Yeah.
People like you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, all of you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
sharing
Kate.
your story.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Katie.
Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about the kinds of services you provide? And I would invite the rest of the panel to do the same. Your program is unique in that you're located in a senior center, and so that makes the Older Battered Women's program a little bit different than maybe some of your other community partners.
Well, the Older Better Women's program is in the same building as the Senior Center, the Council on Aging, but we are with the Elder Service Agency, Greater Lynn Senior Services. So, and we're funded by the Mass Office for Victim Assistance. So we provide free services for women 50 and over who are or have been victims of abuse. And oftentimes we do get referrals through protective services or self-referral, or do a lot of outreach and hopefully try to reach as many people as possible to let them know that it's you know, that they're not alone, that there's specialized services available to them.
And Sabol, it sounds like, as in this case, often survivors of abuse in later life are coming to domestic and sexual violence providers through Elder Protective Services. What does that look like normally? What kind of services is Elder Protective Services providing?
Well, what Elder Protective Services provides is an assessment or an investigation. We receive reports from both mandated and non-mandated reporters, and we then assign a worker to investigate or to assess those allegations that are reported to us. That process is normally a 30-day process, but it can extend longer, and then we do service planning. And we work with the elder, we work with the family, we work with providers, doctors, to come up with a plan that would best serve the reported allegation of abuse and relieve that abuse.
And some of the people that you might refer to would be the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center as an example of rape crisis services, or Mary's organization, which is a community-based both domestic violence shelter and rape crisis services. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about how you might be different than some of the work that Katie does? Katie, for example, mentioned going to apartment, meeting with her even before she was certain that she might be ready for services. How does that look different for both of you in your respective roles and organizations?
Sure. So rape crisis centers offer a variety of services for survivors. Oftentimes they are free and confidential and could include counseling, both individual and group counseling, legal advocacy, and other case management services to assist with finances or housing options or a variety of other things that somebody might need. We do ask for survivors to contact us in a couple of different ways. They can call our hotline and put in a request for services. They could also call or come into the office and talk directly with a staff member and put in that request for services. But we operate off of, the model where we want to make sure that people who are coming to us for help really want the services that they're asking for. So we do ask for either them to make the call or for them to come in, but understanding that can be difficult. So if they want to bring a support person, if they want to have somebody with them while they're making the phone call, that's completely fine.
And I think that's very similar to what most domestic violence agencies offer as well. It's a constellation of services that's really individualized around what a particular survivor has experienced and what kinds of supports that they're looking for and can be helpful. And so much in the same way as the rape crisis centers, we offer counseling, support groups, advocacy. We can go to court with folks. And we also ask that people contact us directly, but again, that can be a very difficult thing. And so I think really, making sure that someone is ready to access services, but however we can connect with them is fine. So whether it's they're making a telephone call to us either through our hotline or through our office, whether it's another service provider or someone else helping to make that call, sometimes just sitting with someone and making the call can be really helpful. Or whether it's somebody reaching out on behalf of a survivor. Again, whatever connects them to the service, we will assist with that. And all of our services are free and confidential and offered in a variety of languages. And I think most programs have different, language capacity. So.
And for all of you, it sounds, Katie, like you spent you have a relationship with. This has been going on for a long time. Is that the norm? Can all of you see people for extended periods of time? Are there, constraints on how long you can accompany people on the journey?
Well, for my program, we're in there for the long haul, for as long as people feel that they need the support, but also for them to give back support to other people, to be an inspiration to other people. Like, an incredible inspiration to other people in the group who will see that she's been able to do it despite other physical challenges, and that she's been able to reclaim her life for herself. So to be able to, and coming from the elder service world, we just have always typically gone and met the elder where they're at, and that means their home where they feel comfortable with. So with the women's program, we certainly do the same thing.
And is that true for all of you?
Yes, in Elder Protective Services, obviously the topics that we're dealing with are very difficult, and building rapport with the elder takes time. And each case is different, so we don't want to put a set time frame on how long the process takes. But yes, we go to their homes, we go to their adult day programs, we go wherever they're most comfortable, and we build that rapport. And from there, we work on the reported concerns and try to take the time to do it right and at the pace that the elder's ready to take.
Great. So our services are a little bit different. The counseling services that we offer is short-term, and it does have to be in person. For legal advocacy and case management, that can follow somebody through the entire process of the different services that they want to seek, or their court process, or whenever they decide that those services should end, even if that's before the process is completed.
And I think very much the same way as the rape crisis centers, domestic violence agencies, for the most part, are not going to go to someone's home because of safety concerns, both concerns for the counselors and the advocates who might be providing the service, but also it can escalate the violence for the survivor. So we don't go to folks' homes, but we will meet folks out in the community, Dunkin' Donuts, library, wherever we can connect with someone. And we're in it for the long haul too. It takes time. These situations are complex, and we want to make sure that folks know that we're there, so they can come in and out of services in a way that makes sense for them. But we're there for the long haul, and we're willing to work with them for however long it takes, because especially if someone's involved in a court process, that can take a very, very long time.
And so sometimes there are barriers. Maybe we don't recognize, maybe it's a language barrier, maybe it's a transportation barrier. Can you talk about, I know for you, Mary, Voices has shelter. Is shelter always appropriate for women in later life? What are the challenges that someone in a situation might face in trying to access our services, and what is it that we can do to help overcome those barriers, reduce those barriers? How can we empower people in situation to make sure they have an open door in front of them?
Yeah, I think sexual and domestic violence are very isolating, very, very difficult circumstances that create barriers in and of themselves that tend to run across all survivors, but survivors in older life, folks that may not speak the language well, there's this whole other set of barriers that land on top of them. And so transportation, mobility, those are all issues. I think that we all try to reduce those barriers in the best way that we can. So for instance, if someone doesn't drive, we could offer phone counseling. We could work with a family member that might be able to bring them into our service. We might be able to meet them out in the community in a safe location. You mentioned shelter, and I think that's an interesting question, because while shelter can be a very important, it can be a life-saving, option for someone, it's not always the best option for every survivor. And I think for older survivors, I think there are some unique things that you have to think about. Many domestic violence shelters are in old homes that may be multi-level, and perhaps all of the rooms are on the second and third floor and there's no elevator. So if there's any kind of a mobility issue, that can be really tough. Some domestic violence shelters also have rules that are around safety. It's all wrapped around how do we keep folks safe. So some of the environment can be very restrictive in terms of where folks can, go, who they can be with, who they can talk to. And again, it's not to be controlling, it's around safety. I think that some programs require folks to make their own food. Well, if you don't, if you have dexterity issues, that can be difficult too. So can it be a great option for folks? Absolutely. Is it always the best option to pull someone out of their home, perhaps a home they've been in for 47 years, living in the same community? That may not always be the best option. So again, I think, to Sabul's point, creating that relationship, working with an individual survivor to try to figure out what are the best options, and then to plug them in to the best of our ability.
With our program, we actually have an apartment that we can put people in a senior housing complex that we utilize for protective services. So we'll have that, and we also have a unit. It's a room and a bathroom in a building where it's kind of a single room occupancy building, where there's it's a woman's home, and it's specifically for women, like I said. So to be able to have that as a resource as well, where there's case management there all day long, there's someone there to oversee. So we have that as a transitional housing.
And your program is exceptional in that way? I know that's not normally what EPS workers have access to, is instant apartment here, let me let me share this with you, this resource. What does that look like for you, Sybil? You must run into different kinds of barriers, shelter and other barriers. What do you see most often, and how does EPS approach that in terms of empowering people to get over those barriers?
Absolutely. We deal with a multitude of barriers, including cultural barriers, language, economic barriers, things that would come up across the board, but in certain communities it's more prevalent. So the way that we deal with it at our agency is to have a diverse group of caseworkers that speak multiple languages, who understand different cultures. We also obviously have workers who understand the need to be respectful of the differences within the population. So we deal with it on that level. As far as shelters and housing, we use our ombudsman for available respite beds, or we use some of the shelters in Boston. So we just kind of adapt and try to utilize what's available to us through home care, through protective services, and the agencies around it.
So you are scrappy, like most
Absolutely.
human service
Absolutely.
professionals.
Yeah. There's no set formula. We use what we get, and we make it work. Absolutely.
And Stacy, I know often, despite the overlap between intimate partner violence and sexual violence, shelter isn't a tool that most rape crisis centers have, or that it's not normally the thing that most people come in the door asking for. So what are the barriers that you are normally seeing, and how does the staff of your rape crisis center, or Mary, even your rape crisis center staff, what does that look like for all of you?
Sure, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Many times there's not a shelter connected, so we're working with local domestic violence agencies to try and make those connections. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is, a person's ability to, seek out services around that sexual violence that they experience, and be able to have conversations and ask for services specifically around that. Because even if they're having conversations around other forms of abuse that they've experienced, they're not talking about the sexual abuse or sexual violence that might be present in that exact same relationship. So I think even getting people in the door can be a barrier. And it's really relying on the relationships that they might be forming with their protective service agents, or local domestic violence agencies, to kind of pick up on those and then make further referrals that might include us.
And can I actually ask you and Sybil to unpack that, to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's one of those invisible barriers. Language is an obvious barrier, right? If you have a mobility challenge and you can't utilize stairs and there's no elevator, those things are concrete and they're very obvious to most of us. But the fact that even domestic violence professionals don't often screen, and elder protective service professionals too often across the country don't often pick up on those signs of sexual abuse, I think is an invisible barrier. And so I'm wondering if you and Sybil could talk about the ways in which you might approach a situation like to assess someone, to ask, to inquire about whether or not that person can safely say no to sexual activity when they're uncomfortable, or whether or not they could safely negotiate safer sex. What do those conversations look like, and how do you approach them, and how do you help that person to feel comfortable really having that conversation, especially, given that this is we're talking about several age cohorts of people who didn't grow up with healthy relationships classes in high school. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important thing to recognize, is that so many people, so many elders are coming at the topic of sex and the topic of sexual violence, and that not being something that was discussed or was appropriate to discuss outside of a home or outside of a relationship. So really just broaching that conversation can be difficult. So really leaving things as open-ended as possible is going to be so important, and letting them use whatever language that they want to be using, and kind of mirroring that back, instead of coming right out and labeling an experience as rape or as sexual assault or as sexual violence, because that can very quickly, shut a person down and stop that conversation altogether.
Well, for our elder protective services, we normally get a case in for one type of allegation, and it's kind of like an onion. As you peel away the layers, you start to feel or see more and more until you do get to the heart of what's causing or what is going on. So often we go in for an emotional abuse, and we might, through building a rapport or a conversation or like you said, going to where the person's at, they might give some hints or some clues to sexual abuse or other forms of neglect or other types of abuse that the worker is trained to pick up on, and not to react necessarily right away, but to make note of it and then come back to it when the elder is more comfortable. And through the process of the assessment and in even the service planning period, try to always get back to that and address it as comfortably as they can.
Yeah, I think that comment that you had as far as reacting is really important because a person does have to really monitor their body language, their tone, because as people are dropping hints, they're also watching how we're reacting, and we don't want to put out there that, you know, it's over impacting us or making us too emotional, because we want them to continue having that conversation.
Absolutely.
And can I just want to advocate for finding ways to screen for sexual violence within domestic violence relationships, because we know that it is an important risk indicator of more severe possible lethality in relationships, and they're difficult conversations. Again, I think as we build relationships with the survivors that we're working with, but it's so critically important to find a way to have the conversation.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I want to also point out, Sybil, I'll call on you, because Ethos and Elder Protective Services in Massachusetts in particular are really good at being mindful of sexual violence, screening for sexual violence in circumstances of partner abuse. You're also really good collectively about being alert to the presence of LGBT elders, whether or not they use those labels for themselves, that they may be in same-sex relationships, or there may be some gender non-conforming folks who don't feel safe coming out to the Elder Protective Services worker. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, talk about what Ethos does and how that might open up the conversations around sexual assault differently, or just give people more room to have those conversations differently.
Yeah, when we do receive reports, obviously they need to be screened in through a supervisor. So we do take a close look at the intake and try to determine if there is some concerns related to sexual abuse, or even the players in the case, whether or not the relationships, what they could possibly be. And based on that screening, we do assign workers, potentially male workers to a male alleged victim who is dealing with an issue that might be male-oriented, and we do the same for female. And doing that allows the elder to align a little better with the worker and speeds up that trust level that's needed to discuss some of these topics. So we definitely take the time to appropriately screen and assign, because it makes a huge difference from a first meeting refusal to a second meeting, third meeting, fourth meeting, and you actually get to help the elder. So yeah, it's definitely important.
Can I ask all of you, do you mind if we use your experience maybe as our jumping off point? Given what you understand of experiences over 47 years, how would you, what strategies would you have encouraged to consider in terms of safety planning? What suggestions would you have made to help her maximize her safety? What suggestions did you make to help her maximize her safety?
Well, when I met, she was living in assisted living, so she had already taken that on herself.
She had her own safety
Right.
plan.
She did.
Genius.
She did.
And you know, that was the first time my sons respected me. They had really seen me as a mouse. And I have a lot of education. I've had jobs that were challenging and productive and helping people. And they just thought I was, and during their adolescence, their father really demeaned me. And women don't matter. They don't count. They feed us. They do our laundry, that kind of stuff. They work to pay my tuition, but they don't really. And I used to say to them, you guys are stallions, but I am a unicorn. And it's a horse. I can run. I can meet you at the end of the day. You guys run fast. You're strong. You chase away other things. but I have powers as well. And even with that analogy, he overrode it. You know, what are you talking about? The unicorns are mythical, you know, and there she goes again, trying to, you know, trying to say that we aren't important, you know, how women can be. And, you know, it's an all-male household, obviously. Even the cat had 6 male kittens. I couldn't get over it then. I just said, well, I guess I'm in a male household, you know? And in reference to someone's, and I don't remember who, I'm sorry, I was 19 when I got together with my former husband. And he was 23, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, he's so much older and so wonderful, and he's good looking. But he's also very large. And he used to use his body. He never really, once he did push me. He used to limit where I could be in the house, and once he pushed me. But he would loom over me and kind of growl, really, and in that way intimidate me. And if I had known what services were available, you know, I would have been so much more a person, you know, so much less a mouse. The marriage was nearly a rape situation the whole way through. There was never any tenderness or any attentiveness to me as a human being. I just felt like I was supposed to just jump in bed and leave it at that. But anyway, when I took all my money and I used it to protect myself, my kids came to me and said, you know, Mom, that's really nice. They were older. That's really good. Yeah, glad to see you taking care of yourself. You know, so that was a reinforcing thing too. But honestly, if I'd known there was a rape crisis center oriented toward older adults, I would have been glad to go there. If I'd realized what protective services could offer, I would have challenged that finding that nothing was going on in my house. You know, I guess I was just so downtrodden.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. So I don't know how in the community people could make themselves present as a service for older adults too. I think of rape crisis as someone in her 20s,
Yeah.
you know, who is date raped and that kind of stuff. But I don't think of someone approaching, I'm 70 now, saying, well, you know, maybe in your relationship, you know, you were physically overwhelmed, or I was, or just treated as nothing, just a receptacle. And I didn't really realize that stuff, but I could have. So I don't know what, you know, what I'm putting on you or whatever, but I would make that as a suggestion.
You are right now already changing that for other people just by using your voice. So thank you for sharing your story.
You know, I don't think you never think that what you've done or been through is important. Everyone minimalizes what's going on.
Well, it's very important, and I think lots of older adults, lots of older women in particular, have that view, unfortunately, because that's the picture that many of us created, that domestic and sexual violence services were for people who are 20 or 30 or 40. And for Katie, you, as someone who often deals with women in later life, you met when she had already activated her own genius safety plan. Can I ask, I imagine you often meet women who are still living with a partner who's abusive. What kind of safety planning do you see that those women are already engaging in? What kind of safety planning options do you offer them as possible, you know, strategies for maximizing their safety, whether they're staying or whether they're choosing to leave?
Well, we do brainstorm about safety plans, whatever they feel comfortable. Who do they have in their support team? Who do they have? Who can they call? Where can they go? We also oftentimes put in Lifeline. The Lifeline is great because we can be unassuming and say, we're going to put this in for you, for the man, in case you fall. She can't pick you up, so you'll be able to get help. So
I had a woman once who I tried to offer her one of those Verizon Hopeline cell phones, and she said, "Oh, sweetie, I don't I don't need a Hopeline phone, I have a Lifeline pendant. Yes. And as a hospital-based person, because there are hospital-based domestic and sexual violence programs across the country, her safety plan was she would push her Lifeline pendant when her partner, who was rather large, started to loom over her and it got too scary. She would just say, I'm having chest pains. She would push her Lifeline pendant and she would come to the hospital for a few days, and that was her version of a respite bed.
And there was one woman in particular I can think of that was, we called the Lifeline and said, if she presses this button, do not ask if she's okay, just send the police. And that's how we had it set up with them, so that it wasn't someone else being able to say, yeah, she's fine, you know, she doesn't need help. So yeah, we can be as creative as we need to be, but always keeping in mind that we want the woman to feel safe, whatever she feels comfortable doing.
And what strategies have you guys used? Have you guys learned from folks in this situation?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that we do, again, is it's very individualized. It's around whatever is happening in a particular situation and trying to strategize with the survivor around, you know, what are the options that might be available? Who can they call? How can they reach out? Is there a way to safely call 911? Is there a way to have a code word with a friend that you pick up the phone and you know, say purple banana or whatever it happens to be, but that person knows that means that you're really, really in trouble. I think the other piece of that is strategizing around leaving. You know, one of the things that you know, we hear so much is, well, why don't you just leave? Well, leaving can be really dangerous. And it takes planning to do it safely. And so talking with someone about how they can structure that move in a way that keeps them safe and that lays out the necessary things in order to transition out of the house. For instance, you know, do you have a copy of your birth certificate, your driver's license? Do you have an extra month's worth of your medications that you can start stashing somewhere? Is there a way to get some money to build up a little bit of a reserve? So really working with that person to try to figure out what that looks like.
So I can definitely third everything that has been said so far, as opposed to repeating it, and then really just around the sexual abuse or violence that might be happening specifically. You know, we can work with clients and figure out if they've done anything in the past that has helped to diffuse that situation and try and build off of that, or also talk about if they feel comfortable having a conversation with their partner in a non-sexual setting about how this is coming across, and if they do feel comfortable in that situation, like role play or brainstorm what is some language that they might use and how might they respond in that situation. But again, that's not going to be feasible for everybody, but it could be an option.
Some of the options that Elder Protective Services uses is home care and services. We use the emergency response button as well. Adult day health to get the elder out of the home for hours throughout the day. Homemaker, home health aid, getting more people in the house. Something as simple as home delivered meals too can provide a set of eyes. A person that comes by a house, a lot of these elders feel isolated and really don't see anyone except their abuser. So it's always nice to have another person, someone that they can align with, and a case manager that you can call. So that's some of the techniques that we use to try to safety plan. We also do restraining orders and police involvement and those types of things, but on a lower level we just try to do low impacting services or steps that can help the elder feel safer.
I tell all my clients that what we're doing is building your support team from someone who is oftentimes so isolated, may not have that kind of support that they need. So if Protective Services goes in, and then Protective Services might bring in home care services and get a case manager, and then you might call in the women's program, and I might call in the domestic violence or the sexual assault agency. And continue to build, you know, if we have to work with clergy around, you know, if the client wants that. Again, building the team so that she feels so empowered that she can change her whole life.
Yeah. And I wanted to say something about being in Katie's group, and that is that I now realize that my former husband controlled me with his rage. And I didn't know it, as I said, like the frog in the hot water. I didn't really know it until I came into Katie's group, and I heard other women talk about the fact that they had been a victim of their perpetrator's rage. And so that's where the support group came in to help me realize more and purge more. That's why I feel like I'm a survivor. You know, that I could look at it, name it, get angry at it or grieve it, and then say, okay, you know, that part of my life is a stepping stone instead of a hole.
And people that are in the relationship and may never leave the relationship, they still gain strength from other women, and a safe place for them to talk about what's going on at home and get ideas from other people about what worked for them in safety planning, what worked for them, and to be able to share that, it's extremely powerful. It makes such a huge difference.
And I actually think I'm going to embrace that as a moment to end on, because what we all do in our work, honestly, is take leadership and learn from survivors. And so the fact that you have provided leadership, that you created your own safety plan, that you were learning from other women in the group that Katie was facilitating, I think is an amazing example of what is possible. And so I want to thank you truly for sharing your story. I think it's going to have enormous impact, both for other professionals, but also for other community members and for other survivors. So I want to thank all the panelists, and I hope you will all join me in thanking for sharing your story. We're really grateful.
Thank all of you. Really, I mean, honestly, I was suicidal for years, and I wouldn't be alive except for my psychologist. I wouldn't be here except for all the services and the blessings that have happened for me along the way. So I thank you for your thanks, but I also want to say that it's built slowly, and then all of a sudden it comes to fruition. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us. We hope this was helpful, and once again we'd like to thank and the rest of our panelists for their wisdom and their expertise.